Well, there is a link. When I was first elected, people said to me, you simply exchange one form of theatre for another. And I said rather glibly, well, if I have, the House of Commons is remarkably under-rehearsed, the lighting is appalling, and the acoustic is even worse. But the link for me is the best drama tries to tell the truth, tries to find and tries to tell the truth. Essentially, I mean, the prime example, of course, is Shakespeare. It doesn't matter where he sets the play, it doesn't matter what the story is. Essentially, all he's ever asking is, who are we, what are we, why are we? Admittedly, in the most brilliant form ever known to man. And I think that is what the best politics is trying to find. It's how do you democratically create a society in which the individual can be that divinely created individual, but where there is an approach, a shared acceptance of the basic realities of what it is to be a human being. And the basic realities of being a human being is not all sweetness and light, and it's how you manage to coordinate what is best. I really resent that question. I resent the idea that my only interest in politics arose when I was approached by what became my constituency Labour Party to consider being their prospective candidate for the election that was eventually called in '92. I'm of a generation that couldn't vote before you were 21. But I have always voted, not only in general elections, but in most of the local authority elections as well. I have always been a convinced and Labour Party supporter, and I don't think it's entirely selfish, but I do think the changes that the Labour government brought in 1945, which transformed my life and the life of millions of people like me across this country, that whole sense of, you know, a social dream which was made a reality by a socialist party. And so I've always, what's the word I'm looking for, not credited, valued my right to vote. And it always shocks me when people proudly say, oh, I never bothered to vote, or why, you're all exactly the same. You know, people fought and died to give us that right. So my political life, my political engagement, if you like, didn't just begin when I sat on those green benches. Well, you're presupposing that charisma is automatically beneficial. Hitler must have been very charismatic. So was Mussolini. Mao Zedong certainly was. Stalin, Russia now, they had a vote, didn't they, of the most important or the most revered Soviet citizen, and I think Stalin came out on top. So again, to go back to my point about human nature and human beings, charisma doesn't carry with it a halo. You can be charismatic, and the journey you want the people to go on can take you to hell. I mean, those names I've just quoted prove that, I think. I think on the one you've quoted about Clinton and Lewinsky, that whole drama, I mean, he's a marvelous, marvelous campaigner, I think. And he loves it, and he is devoted to politics, to the political ideal. But I don't think it's, what's the word I'm looking for here? It is based on really fundamental beliefs about their society, about what democracy means, about what a republic means, about, you know, government of the people, by the people, for the people. And I think he weathered that. It wasn't so much, it seems to me, the relationship with Lewinsky. I think the thing that he managed magnificently, in a sense, to come out of was, in the first instance, denying it and then apologizing for it. And, you know, he really, really apologized. I mean, they really put him through it for that. And I think that is something that people recognise. And I think there was a genuine way, an antipathy. I don't think it was limited to America, of, you know, what possible business is it of an electorate, what goes on behind closed bedroom doors? Even though in his instance it wasn't a closed bedroom door, it was an office door, so I suppose there are fine details there. If you look at who was, in my view, one, if not the, well, I'll stick to one of the best prime ministers this country has ever had, and the least charismatic politician you could imagine, and that would be Clement Attlee. So, setting aside the way the world has actually changed and how the electorate, I think, has changed and how the approach to politics has changed, the real drama in politics doesn't come from politicians, it comes from the press. It comes from a 24/7 media. What's the word I'm looking for? I was going to say furore. That to go back to what Harold Macmillan said, you know, when somebody said to him, what's the big thing about being Prime Minister? He said, events, dear boy, events. The events now are almost second by second. I mean, look at today, for instance. We're sat here. The only story, we've got 3 by-elections in this country today. Hopefully Labour will win them all. The only story that's running is the Levinson inquiry. And the only reason that is running at that level is because it involves the press. The press are almost, and I'm covering the whole range here, I don't just mean the printed media. That's where the drama comes from. That's the kind of pressure that is on all politicians. No, not all politicians. It is on politics in a sense. I didn't win them. I didn't do anything for them. There was nothing that I did over and above what I'd always done. I mean, you know, you do a film and you do the best you can, but you don't win them. I mean, the people who win are, I suppose in a sense, the people who voted for you because their choice is the one that had the biggest number. But and, you know, what do they mean? I mean, somebody said, oh, it's like winning a gold medal. No, it isn't. The Olympics, everybody starts at the same point. They know exactly where the finishing line is, and you either get there first or you don't. Acting isn't like that. You know, if you don't have if the part isn't there, if that aspect isn't there, you know, we've all seen loads of stuff, but I mean, there are people who should have got Oscars and never did because the part wasn't showy enough or something enough. Do you know what I mean? They certainly don't make you act any better. I mean, the idea that always runs with actors is that acting is either a game for fools or that all actors are liars, and that the best acting is the one that can conceal. Well, in fact, really good acting is like peeling an onion. To go back to the point I made earlier, you're trying to find out, and obviously the dramatist has done most of the work for you in this area, but what is truthful about being a human being? What is the truth? And to go back again to being, for me, the best politics is always trying to divine in a sense, in the sense of digging something up, what is the truth about the way a country should be structuring itself? What are our basic fundamental principles? What are we prepared to say, this is our red line, we're not going over this one? And what constitutes best? Well, I don't know. I mean, how would you know? I suppose it's in the quality of the country, in the atmosphere, I suppose, in its principles. But it's not in either context, either politics or theatre. It's not cheating. I think that's the first thing. It's not cheating, and it's not a pretense, even though both those things do come into the world of politics, as we sadly know. Not so much about Clinton, but certainly about Blair, and my response was no, because you would always know when he wasn't telling the truth. Clinton, you know, their capacity for presenting themselves, not only in the roles that they inhabited, was obviously, I mean, you know, it was quintessential to both of them. But whether, what I'm trying to dig out of my rather lazy tongue and brain at the moment is, they could both perform, but there's a difference between a performance and acting. And I'm trying to find out, and I'm not having any success at the moment, how to define that for you. It is entirely right and proper that, you know, if you are the president of the most powerful country in the world, if you're a British Prime Minister who is going to take your country into a completely immoral and probably illegal war, that when you actually proselytize these arguments, there is an element of performance in that. But I go back to the point that that's not the same as performing on a stage in another context. I didn't identify in that sense. I mean, the point about every part you play, or rather, you can't be judgmental. I mean, you have to try and see the world through that character's eyes. But to come at it another way and say, you say, what would you like to do again? The only two that I would have wanted to have had another crack at was The Three Sisters and probably Antony and Cleopatra.
Why was that?
Well, you could mine them forever and never find it all.
Just because the complexity of the role.
Yeah, absolutely. And words are very ambiguous, you know. Winning a seat, I think actually winning a seat is pretty good. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that is, and you don't win it on your own, let me hasten to add. I mean, you wouldn't win it without all those people who turn out in all terrible weather to bang on doors and stick leaflets through letterboxes, but yeah. Well, I think the stereotypicalization of women in any profession other than what are the ones that it's okay for women to want to be ambitious in? Teaching, nursing, what used to be called the caring professions. That has fundamentally, I think, changed, but the barriers are still there. I mean, it's interesting you say me that, because on the way in, I had the radio on, and it was one of the Melvyn Bragg things in our time, and the programme was about crystallography. And as always, there were two male scientists and one woman scientist. And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, about the sort of expansion of crystallography. There were many women in it. And she said yes, because women at that time were being allowed into science, and crystallography was a very generous science, and, you know, people took the women that came in. And I thought, you would never, ever ask a question like that of a man. You know, underlying it wasn't underlying it. He was actually saying, what is it about women that makes them good at crystallography? And give her credit, she sort of tried to debunk that. But that still runs. And one knows here, you know, the new female women MPs come in. The first thing is the press tells you what they're wearing. I mean, you know, Theresa May is never going to get away from her leopard skin kitten heels. Nobody ever points out that most of the men here wear exactly the same boring suits. The only things they ever change, well, I presume they put clean shirts on, is a tie. It's not an issue, but it is an issue. And the other thing is still, for a woman, if she does have a professional exposure, let's say she's as we're here, she's a woman MP, she not only represents her constituency and her party, she represents the entire female gender. And that's, you know, we're not an homogenous group, we're not all the same, but that still runs. there have been major moves forward, but we've still got an awfully long way to go. Well, it's not that we've got to. The rest, I think, of society has got to move rather faster. Well, it was pretty dramatic waiting for the result in 1992, which I think didn't come in until about 2 in the morning. But what was really interesting for me about that, I mean, it was a very, very long night and big disappointment because we didn't form a government. But the BBC has been running on Sundays a series of programmes where they show again the whole of their coverage on an election day. And I happened to be flicking around trying to find news and tuned into this one, and it was 1992. And what was totally fascinating to me was that absolutely nothing in the coverage of an election, in the response to the results, in the kind of questioning of winners and losers, in the eternal attempt on the part of the commentariat to predict the future, to know what was going to happen. There was absolutely no change in what they were saying in 2010 as to what they were saying in 1992, and it was the same people asking the same questions. Bit scary, actually. Well, certainly if one looks at the postage that I've received from my constituents, who in the main welcomed the idea of a baccalaureate, an English baccalaureate. But the two areas that they have been most anxious should be, or rather have been pressing, should be included in the EBAC, have been religious education and the arts. And I'm not a religious practitioner, so put that to one side. Obviously, you'd expect me to be interested in the arts. And it is something I find, I'll put it another way. We're getting a great deal at the moment about the legacy of the Olympic Games, that wonderful event in the summer of this year, and how that legacy must be maintained. And it's always, almost exclusively, about sport. Now, when we won the Olympic Games for London, it was on the two legs, if you like, of sport on one hand and culture on the other. And wonderful the Olympic Games were as far as our athletes were concerned. That opening ceremony was fantastic. I'm not hearing that same argument emanating from anywhere, really, in any cohesive way, that another part of the legacy of the Olympics has to be our cultural life. And as we know, we're going through a big downturn in our economy, and the thing that always gets sniped at first will be the arts and culture of this country. But it is so central and essential, it seems to me, to not just to the quality of life. Arts and culture earn this country a great deal of money. And if you are going through hard times, I've never argued that, you know, the arts or culture should be outside. If the cake gets smaller, we all have to have a smaller slice. But the one thing you don't do is slice your seed corn. That's if times are really hard, that's where it has to go. And if you want to go beyond seed corn, then you have to look at your educational systems. So I hope the argument will prevail that that will become part of the EBAC.